So if you watch my other videos, you probably heard me say that I talked with somebody that's very knowledgeable, not only about Unreal Engine, but also about game engines in general, because he's been deep into Unity, Godot. He was like during the first steps of Unreal Engine as well. He knows several people within Epic too. So I think he was an amazing person to talk to about the issues that are plaguing Unreal Engine now. So that is a video that you're going to watch today. This is a very technical talk, and I know there's people in my audience that are not game developers. So if there are terms that you don't understand, his Discord is in the description down below, or his socials are below, and subscribe to his channel if you want to know more about Unreal Engine. Of course, I'm talking about Wild Ox Studios. He has amazing videos on his channels. Always feel free to ask questions about the things that we're discussing. More than happy to answer. And if I can't answer, I'm pretty sure Wild Dogs will do on his channel, on his Discord. So make sure that if you are interested in this subject, you also subscribe to him. Now let's get started.
Yeah, Wild Ox Studios here. Everybody who is familiar with the channel knows what I'm about. Been in the Epic camp for a really long time. Started my dev journey in Quake Engine. Try my best to basically support the community, the dev community, from mobile to VR to desktop to consoles. Those that have been kind of following the channel for a while, you're familiar with my GitHub, so tons of resources over there, tons of resources in the Discord. Extremely thankful for the opportunity to get on here with you and kind of go through what's happening in the Unreal scene.
Well, let's start with, what's been recently happening, which is the Unreal Engine 5 hate. I was going to say Unreal, but I think Unreal Engine 5, it's more appropriate for what's been going on, especially with recent games, like especially with Metal Gear Solid 5, which the performance has been awful.
Yeah, so Digital Foundry did a video and they've kind of broken that out. And I guess in all fairness, I would say it's probably it's probably centered around UE5, but like you said in your previous video, throughout history, engine transitions haven't been the easiest thing, right? So like we've seen issues with UE4 early on coming out of UE3, and then Unreal Engine 5 is I think going on 3 years now. It's only about 3 years into its implementation. We're at 5, 6. So like at this point in UE4's life cycle, I would say that it hadn't even reached stability yet in its own life cycle. So of course you're gonna have the big dogs like The Witcher, Metal Gear, AAA studios that have like jumped on board UE5 really early, and they're gonna be probably dealing with more of the growing pains of the engine than say like AA studios or indie studios. And that's not always the case. Like everybody loves Expedition 33, and they probably are considered more AA than AAA. But you also have to consider like the scope of the game and what they're doing versus like what a Metal Gear Solid game is. Digital Foundry said the thing that struck them the most is the fact that the PlayStation Pro, which is supposedly has a much higher performance output, overhead, and feature set, has actually been crippled a little bit by their PSSR approach and kind of the output that they're aiming for with their performance settings. I think it's mainly the idea of like the base model being able to sustain that 60 hertz on the options that's available to that version of the console, versus like the PS5 Pro is, the default options that you have available to you. You're either dealing with a lot of artifacting or you're dealing with really poor frame rates. Coming down to 30 frames periodically when you're supposed to be in a 60 hertz locked frame time, especially on modern day LCD LED monitors that don't deal with that frame fluctuation very well. It's not like the old school days where you were playing a Nintendo 64 and 30 frames per second was fine because you were primarily on CRTs. The tech around modern gaming is a lot different nowadays.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was going to ask you, I think the There's been a lot of marketing and PR around Unreal Engine 5 that we didn't have around the other iterations of Unreal Engine. So I think in general, like the public was not as aware of the game engine from before.
Yeah, I agree with that. So UE5 is an excellent tool. Like I love Unreal Engine 5 as a game dev, but and I've said this in my previous videos, and I hate following a sentence up with but. The tool has grown in different markets faster than it's ever grown before. Like short film, like that Disney money, Legos, commercials, the Weather Channel. There are multitudes of industries that are coming into Unreal Engine, and at the last two Unreal Fest, I've met a lot of really cool people that are working with UE5 across all of these different subsets of the entertainment industry. And that goes as far as like manufacturing and stuff too. So it's kind of a double-edged sword where you've garnered this marketing and this attraction and this hype around this engine that's being kind of infused with all these brand new features that are not only beneficial to the game industry, because I won't go as far as to say that these things aren't going to help the gaming industry, because they will, but they're probably at a state where they're either very early experimental, they're still in progress, they're still in flight, and they're more tailored around sequencer, animation pipeline, short film, something that you can maintain 30 frames per second on, or even render out like close to real time, but still a lot faster than you would do in like C4D or Octane or some other,
Yeah.
IDE or editor. So that's where UE5 is really shining. And the game development side of things, the hardware hasn't really kept up with what I think early Epic Games Unreal was thinking the market was going to do whenever UE5 was being, I guess, planned for and thought about. Like, I it's hard. Even if I was to play devil's advocate and put myself in like Tim Sweeney's shoes or the leaderships at Epic and say, where do I think hardware's going to be? And what do I think the minimum requirement for running an engine this way is going to be? And how do I think the tool set is going to evolve? It's a tough thing to be in those shoes and make those kinds of decisions. I do want to touch on the point of like I hear it over and over and over again that this is a free tool, right? That's what people want to tout. They're like, this is free, this is free, this is free. But the reality is, if you're in the Unreal Engine business, and you use it for any organization, any enterprise organization, outside of say teaching, because teaching does have a very unique license model. It's very much an ECULA contractual agreement between two businesses. It's a tool that you've paid for in some way, shape, or form. You pay for UDN seats, you pay for the licensing in a royalty fashion if you're a game developer, but you also pay licensing per seat if you're in entertainment. So that model was adjusted in 5.4. Disney, Lego, all of these people that are making films or whatever, be what it may, there's a revenue stream there, and I think that in one way it's good because the revenue that's coming in for that isn't on the backs of Fortnite money and game development royalties anymore. It's actually paved its own revenue stream for growth in that place of the engine.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, yeah, and I just hope that those tooling and those things that's been implemented, that those resources and that tooling and that money can go back into doing what Tim is talking about now. Whenever he was like, "Hey, we are working internally to make the engine more performant, and we're also trying to increase awareness, like they're doing with like the Hitch Hunt."
Yeah. So one of the things that's related to the same topic is because we both have videos on it, what Tim Sweeney came out to say. I think we both have we both agree, but we also have a little bit of a different perspective. One of the things that I've been seeing a lot, because I have a series on my YouTube channel where I open games and we look at 3D models and look at all the assets that they have. And lately, I've been seeing a lot of games that are just full of mega scans, like very little custom stuff aside from like the main characters and one asset here and there. And I can't help but kind of understand where Tim Sweeney is coming from, because they're using like, mega scans. You can use several tiers of what they have. When you're inside of the engine, you bring the bridge plugin, then you open the mega scans, and there's just several levels that you can choose. One is the cinematics, which I think it's almost never chosen for video games because it's too high poly, even though we have Nanite right now. But then there's the other tiers like high, medium, and low quality. Like the high doesn't differ too much from the cinematic quality. And I think the high is still way too high for video games. And I do feel a lot of developers are just, hey, they told us this is cool and we're just going to do it. We're just not going to even test it, not even going to make sure if this is the right way to go or not. And they're just throwing in all these assets together. And yeah, when you load it up on a PC with a 5090, everything looks great, everything runs fine. But then when you distribute it and you run it on a console or you run it on a medium low end PC, then you're gonna have a lot of problems. And I think there is a lot of that going on, especially from I don't want to be too specific, but especially with a lot of games that are coming from Asia, like Black Myth Wukong. Even though I think that game performed okay, a lot of people love that game. Phantom Blade Zero, I have seen a lot of that game, and it still followed the same. Not only does it look the same as the other ones that I mentioned, but it also seems to be using a lot of those assets, a lot of mega scans. And another example that contrasts this is a video that I'm going to have soon about a game called Wildgate, which is a game that was made in Unreal Engine 5, and it works fantastically well. I can hit 120 frames per second, very easy, no hitches, no nothing. And guess what? There are no mega scans, there are no marketplace assets in it. Everything is custom made, and it looks very different from anything that I've played before. Inside, in fact, if I didn't tell you this game was made with Unreal Engine, you probably wouldn't know.
Yeah, and that's going to be an ongoing trend that you're going to see. Valorant's a really good example of this. I've mentioned it in previous videos. And and I agree with Tim that like developers to some degree, especially in these double A's, like people who are trying to use the engine in the way that it was marketed very early on, where it's like, hey, if you switch over to UE5, it'll reduce your dev time. You have all of these check boxes that you can rely on. Everyone's familiar with the Matrix demo. Everyone's familiar with the Chaos demo. Everyone's familiar with the City sample and the Nanite demo.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but fun fact about those demos are super painful to open.
Exactly. They're super painful.
Even when they came out, the 3090, which I still have, when the Matrix demo came out, open it in my computer, which 16 core 3090, 64 gigs of RAM, that thing runs slow slow that I was like, I don't know how they made it work on a PlayStation.
yeah And I mean, that's the same thing like that a lot of people have been asking me, because they're like, any word on the megalights demo, et cetera, and it's like I'm just a dev. Like I can ask the engineers that I've had contact with at Unreal Fest, etc. But the reality is that like game development, any good studio, any good developer will tell you that a lot of this is smoke and mirrors, right? Whenever we're making games, the presentation is what matters. It's not really what's going on behind the scenes, but you fake it until you make it, right? Like that, there's a target for a certain frame rate, and you do whatever you got to do to get the look that you want across and still perform optimally. And the truth of the matter is that no one knows that better than the engineers behind Fortnite and a lot of these tooling that's coming out. So there's a lot of holding your tongue just right to get those things to perform well. And even whenever they were giving the showcase for the Megalights demo, and they were like, this is running on a PS5, a base PS5. If you notice, like, even during that presentation video, when they pulled up the debug view to show everything, the performance took such a big dip at that moment to show that debug view, that like it was the worst case of screen compression and basically TSR trying to catch up with what was going on that I've ever seen in the engine ever. So there's no telling like what kind of machine they had that running on at the time. Um, but of course, marketing is going to be like, hey, the goal is to be running on a base PS5. So that's what they're going to tell you is happening. And we later did see the Matrix demo running on consoles. But when you break that down, and Digital Foundry actually, I think, went through that, and it may not have been them, but I watched a breakdown of what all was happening there. And it was struggling with frame times. It was not a consistent frame time, which is why they later on came back and was like, hey, with our new asset streaming plugin in 5.6, we've sped up the city sample demo. And that's cool and everything. Yeah, you can fly through that thing at super fast speeds, but don't you dare go try to interact with a car in that thing, because it's going to fly into outer space because of chaos issues. So, so you win some and you lose some. But yeah, it's one of those things where the trend is going to be for at least a little while, just like you noted at the beginning of this talking point. The games that are going to run really well are going to be the studios that had the knowledge to go in and say what part of the base UE5 engine is having problems, what part are underperforming, and what can we do to overcome those performance optimization issues. And I guarantee you that the game you're speaking of, it probably doesn't use DX12 or SM6. It might be running DX11 with SM5 because it's just a more stable RHI. And if not, maybe it's using Vulkan. But part of the problems that have plagued UE5 has been PSO caching and DX12. So I don't even want to say that's really the engine's fault, because a lot of engines have seen problems there. But it is a decision that has been made to kind of follow that course versus, like, say, someone like Godot, who was like, nah, we're going to be Vulkan based from the engine core. And then like Unity, they still used DX11. And to this day, I think on LTS, they still use DX11 as the default RHI. They haven't done what they didn't do what Unreal Engine 5 did, which was DX12, SM6 all the way. So yeah, that's heavy. That is going to be heavier,
Yeah, for real. Another thing that it is very interesting when we relate to Fortnite, and yes, it's made by Epic, and of course it's optimized by their top tier engineers and that. But also Fortnite is a stylized game. And when you from my part, from the part of the artist or the art director, the people who are in charge of the visual stuff, when you do things stylized, it's so much easier to optimize. Like, I can make a character model that looks amazing with like a third of the poly count that I would need for something to be realistic. Same goes for the environment. There's so much you can get away with just using specularity. You don't have to use as many reflections. So you don't have to rely on ray tracing or anything crazy. Because I know screenplays reflections sometimes can look very janky. And that's why people say, well, that's why ray tracing is better, because you don't have the problems that you have with screen space. But I do think like ray tracing has brought a lot of problems. And when you go stylized, then you can, as an artist, optimize and make things look beautiful without having to go all the way and needing all this hardware for performance and stuff.
100%. Like Throne and Liberty is a UE4 title that's massive. It's massive. It's beyond the scope of anything we've seen in UE5 so far. And, it uses SSR, it uses distance field shadows in a distance. It has some of the best non-pop-in TAA blended type of LODing in the game. And you have massive boss fights with hundreds of people on screen at once. And it just chews through it like it's nothing. No performance issues really. And this is on medium hardware. My kids are able to play that game. Granted, I got to bump it down to medium or low on depending on the hardware, but a GTX 1070 can handle it with a decent CPU and enough memory. It's when you start talking about Unreal Engine 5, you start talking about pipelines that were integrated into the engine to either support software based Lumen or hardware ray traced Lumen. and you start talking about changes to the HLSL, which is like the shader code itself. You start talking about changes to the rasterization pipeline when it comes to being able to virtualize geometry. All of that has overhead. Simply switching from an engine that was capable of packaging out and building to a 32-bit platform versus going to UE5, which is pure ARM64, pure 64-bit, double floats all over the place. What they call large world coordinate systems, moving from world composition into world partitioning and how they handle that now. All those underlying core things were basically overhead added to the engine. Moving from a 32-bit based physics solver, which was PhysX, to a 64-bit based physics solver, which is Chaos. All of these things occupy additional memory banks space in hardware. In order to chew on this, now your CPU's got to process essentially a larger float value every time it chews on the data to kind of do these calculations. While you can cut this back and you can do like Valorant did and say, hey, I'm just going to use the mobile render on desktop. I'm going to go highly stylized. I'm going to cut out RTX. I'm going to build tools that have essentially either had issues, haven't been available or whatever to get me over the hump when it comes to dealing with the heavier physics thread. You've taken a choice to kind of go against the exact thing that's the place where I'm like, while I agree with Tim, I also have my issues with the statement of work with the engine instead of against it. Because if everyone just followed the UE5 path, the paved road that they're laying out in front of everyone would be Fortnite.
Yeah.
Or everyone would be Quixel Megascans. And honestly speaking, both of those paths aren't right for every game. Both of those paths, by the way, aren't right for VR, or aren't right for mobile, or aren't right for the Nintendo Switch. Like maybe the Switch 2 could get away with it because it's got a little bit extra overhead. But Tim's like, yeah, Fortnite runs great on the Switch. Well, Fortnite also comes from Unreal Engine 4. Fortnite also has a DX11 SM5 pipeline. Most of the people picking up UE5 tomorrow isn't going to have a decade worth of development on a title that they can add additional graphical fidelity to based on the fact they come from an older RHI. They're starting from scratch, from the base. They're not thinking about this of like, now instead of this making my dev cycle shorter, now I have to do completely two separate rendering paths. If you're a new studio coming in the UE5, you're like, holy cow, I got to go to LOD and HLOD route and develop for mobile and all these consoles. Then if I want to go as high as Nanite and Lumen, I have to go a completely different route with my entire artist resources so I can support these, very high polygon counts, because Nanite will destroy anything medium or low poly based.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's a different world, and it's created this tear in the industry where studios are having to decide very early on, and it is their job, to do the risk assessment, but they have to decide very early on, like, what's my target hardware? What's the path of least resistance? Do I use UE5 or do I use UE4 or do I go with something else like Unity? In the course of VR, you've seen the paradigm shift. UE5 games were great in the 8th gen. Like you had Saints and Sinners, you had Red Faction 2, you had Ghostbusters, multiplayer titles, pretty expansive titles. Pavlov's Shack, Contractors.
Oh yeah.
UE5 comes out and it's like, Unreal Engine what? Yeah, what do we have? Behemoth and Alien? Like the rest of them's been dominated by Unity. That's not the dev's fault. That's because at the end of the day, someone's going to look at the tool that they have and they're going to go, what's the best tool for the job? I can either use a tool that's built to turn this screw, or I could go get something and have to smelt and hammer down and forge my own tool to do what I need it to do. No one's going to take that second route, No one's going to make things harder than they need to be for themselves.
All right, everybody. That was a snippet of the conversation that I had with Wild Ox. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you subscribe to him as well, because he also has amazing videos on his channel. And make sure you stay tuned, because I'm going to keep publishing the rest of the conversation on the channel. Thank you so much for watching all the way to this point. I'll see you in the next one.